first house never looked haunted in daylight. It looked tired, like a person who smiled politely through a cold. It had creaky floors, thin walls, and a bedroom that filled with tree shadows in the wind. At 9 years old, the shadows felt like a private show, until one of them stopped moving. It rested in the corner by the toy chest, not swaying with the branches, not thinning when the moon slid behind a cloud. It just stayed, as if obeying a different wind. The next morning, the chest stood open. That didn't make sense. Mom always said to close it, or toys would spill and she'd be the one to step on the Lego and curse under her breath. The lid had a weak hinge and a fake brass latch that never held well. Still, it never opened by itself. I closed it. I didn't tell anyone. Weeks later, my sister, 5 years old, with hair in mismatched clips, told Mom she didn't like the man in the closet. She said it so casually, like she was reporting the weather. Mom laughed and said little kids have big imaginations, then knelt to pray with her at bedtime. She didn't open the closet. That night, there was a new sound in my room. A soft, thin drag across the floor, like a fingernail tracing the grain. It crossed slowly toward my bed and stopped right where my feet hung off the mattress. I held the blanket up to my eyes and tried not to breathe loud. When I woke at dawn, 4 clean scratches had appeared in the wood, close together, the edges pale and powdery like a fresh cut. Mom got angry. Said I must have dragged the bed or scraped something sharp. I said I didn't. She said, "Then who did?" The house didn't answer. After that, the nights learned to talk. A whisper like a radio behind a wall came from my closet, just at the edge of words. My sister would wake up crying and point to her corner, saying, "He's there, he's there." I never saw him straight on. Only the feeling that someone was behind the dark, like a person behind a window. In winter, the hall light clicked off by itself. The door creaked. A tall shape leaned into the doorway, only a head and part of a shoulder. I shut my eyes and performed sleep like a school play. When I dared look, the door was closed. The next morning, Mom said she hadn't gotten up. My sister said the man stood by her bed. Mom lit a candle and said prayers in every room, with a soft, frightened determination that made me believe her lips more than her eyes. For a while, things were quiet. Then one empty afternoon, the toy chest slammed shut in my room while I sat on the couch doing homework. No one else was home. When I went to look, the chest was closed, the latch down, and my toys were scattered all over the floor, like someone had sifted through them and left in a hurry. Mom said it was the cat. The cat, fat and lazy, blinked from the radiator like it didn't care if I lived or died. Years later, out of that house and into a different one where the floor stayed polite, I asked Mom if anything had happened to her there. She hesitated. She said sometimes she woke up and saw a shadow in her doorway. She didn't tell us because she didn't want to scare us. She believed it was a man, maybe one who lived there before. She never said his name. Houses don't come with names, only keys. It should have all ended with moving boxes and a new school, but certain sounds follow like old habits. Sometimes late at night, the radio whisper returns from nowhere, and the dry drag crosses the floor to the place where feet dangle. I tuck mine up, just in case the manners of the dark never changed. Memory keeps a toy chest in the corner, whether there's furniture or not. Memory keeps a closet door that will not latch all the way, and the certainty that something waits for the exact breath where a child gives up and looks. Maybe it was imagination, maybe it wasn't. The cold that came when the shadow didn't move didn't feel like air. It felt like attention, and attention is the only thing the dark has to feed itself. One night, grown and alone in an apartment that made normal sounds, pipes, neighbors, street tires on wet pavement, I woke to the old rhythm. Drag, pause, drag, pause. I didn't have a toy chest anymore. I did have a closet. The door was almost closed. Not quite. I thought about getting up to push it flush, to prove once and for all that the noises were in my head. I didn't. The dark waited, politely. In the morning, 4 pale scratches marked the floor by where my feet had hung in sleep. The wood here is newer, and the marks were faint, as if whatever followed me learned to be careful. The latch on the closet is fine. It opens itself whenever it wants to be counted. second house pretended to be safe. New siding, trimmed hedges, windows that sealed with a nice sensible click. The street was quiet and backed by trees that met overhead like a green vault, and on the first night, the air smelled like rain even though the sky was empty. The bedroom windows faced the yard. The closet was deeper than any closet needed to be. The tapping began as a question. Light, deliberate, separated by breaths. It would stop when the blanket covered a face. It would start again when the blanket slipped. No branches touched the glass. No insects pattered like that. Just a fingertip rhythm, like someone impatient but polite. The night I finally looked, a pale hand was pressed flat against the window. It seemed to glow because the rest of the yard was ink, and it was too high for anyone to reach. Second floor. No ladder. No porch roof. The hand held there a long time. It slid down slowly, leaving nothing behind, and then it was gone. I didn't sleep. Morning came the slow way, through a tight throat and eyes that burned. Telling parents is a skill no one teaches. Mom laughed until she ran out of laughs and switched to explanations about dreams. The new stepdad said it was a raccoon with human hands. He left the hallway light on that night. He didn't mention why. A month later, the 4-year-old brother started mentioning the white lady the way kids mention thunder. Sometimes she sat on his bed. Sometimes she stood in the doorway. He cried one night until words broke into chokes. When he could speak, he said her eyes were all black. Therapy came next. Words like sleep paralysis and hypnopompic hallucination. The therapist drew pictures of locked windows. The body can trick itself, she said. The mind can make pictures to explain pressure. Maybe, but locks don't turn themselves. On the worst storm night, the window lock turned with a neat metallic decision. The sash slid up smooth. Cold walked into the room like a guest who never wiped her feet. She came in without stepping, tall enough to bend near the ceiling, dress moving in air that didn't move. Her hair was black and stringy, and wrong in a way that the brain understands before it can describe. Her face was chalk. Her eyes were wells without bottoms. She leaned down and whispered a name in a voice like dry leaves rubbing. The scream arrived later, as if it needed a hallway light to find its way. Parents rushed into a closed, locked window, and a child who frightened them more by the way silence held after the scream than by the noise itself. The storm beat the siding. Water ran in the gutter. Everyone said things that sounded like comfort and felt like pleading. The hallway lights stayed on all night, an amber little sun that pushed back only as far as the threshold. After that, nights became routines. Blanket tense, counting breaths, listening for taps. The closet door never stayed fully shut, but it learned to pretend closing almost enough to look decent, always shy a finger width. The brother stopped talking about the white lady, but changed the way he slept, face to the wall, hand under the pillow, as if making an exchange with the dark. I won't look, and you won't say my name. Storms never became normal. Years later, grown and in another town, thunder still turns the stomach. There's always that small, absurd fear that if the blinds lift, the hand will already be there, palm to glass, waiting to slide down and teach the mouth how to forget its own voice. People love neat explanations. Sleep paralysis, suggestion, anxiety, all of them true, maybe. Truth multiplies in the dark. But locks turning by themselves don't fit into a neat box, and memory does not behave like evidence. On a spring night that smelled like wet soil, a gust popped a picture frame slightly askew. The hallway light was on for no reason. Habit. The window gave a soft tick. A person can choose not to look. The blinds stayed down. Breath counted to 100 and back. Somewhere in the house, a door sighed on its hinge, like a tired ant, telling a story she's told for years. The name that used to be spoken in the dry leaf voice remained unsaid. Silence, it turns out, is also a lock, and some nights it holds. The driveway watcher. When the red bike was new, the bell was the best part. It made a clear silver note that sounded like permission. The street was simple, lined with small houses whose roofs dipped and peaked like careful handwriting. On most afternoons, an old man stood where his long driveway met the sidewalk. He wore a hat and did not cross the line. He waved the kind of wave grown-ups reserve for kids who have been taught rules. He asked about school across the distance. He laughed at small jokes. He noticed the bell. He never stepped onto the sidewalk. It went on like that for weeks, friendly without closeness, and the distance between the driveway seam and the concrete curb became a kind of responsible safety. Here is where neighbors talk. Here is where children stop. He knew little things he shouldn't about a younger brother, a father's new car. It was easy to assume he had seen these things, patient on his porch, a watcher of the street. Then he stopped appearing. Curtains closed. The driveway emptied. A woman watered the backyard garden one day. The rule against crossing the street bent under the new bike's bright pride. At the back gate, the woman said the man sounded like Harold, her husband. Harold had died the year before, in his chair. Inside, she fetched a photograph. Hat, smile, the exact warmth of presence that memory carried. Only one difference, a pale scar from ear to mouth. The man by the driveway had no scar. The bike ride home was quiet, not because there was no traffic, but because the mind turned down its own radio. That night, a voice called the name from near the bedroom window. It was a familiar, friendly shape of sound. Parents performed the ritual. Blinds lifted, yard empty, locks checked, flashlight washing the grass. The explanation was sleep. The throat hurt in the morning anyway. Dares entered the story, as they do. Stand in that driveway at night and say his name. The dare was refused. The street changed over the years. Families moved. Paint colors shifted. The long driveway remained, its slope steady, its meeting seams still exact. The woman's house stood empty for a time, then filled with new people, new cars. Returning as an adult, the corner felt smaller and farther at once. The driveway looked shorter, but also like a distance that had always been measured in something other than feet. The old habit rose. Stop at the corner and glance without meaning to. No one stood at the seam. The air had the attentive quality of a held breath. Memory is a better summoner than courage. The voice came again, pleased, gentle, the laugh riding along the name like a brim rides along a hat. Stepping onto the driveway felt like breaking a rule that had been waiting to be broken. The concrete held the day's heat in a way the sidewalk did not, a quiet difference that made the skin think of footsteps stored like sunlight. There was no figure. Peripheral vision tried to invent one and failed. A brim hovered at the edge of where faces form. Race you to the corner, the voice said, and the kneecaps remembered the downhill tug that can send a kid flying into the street if the pedals catch wrong. Nothing moved except the trees. The air softened, warmed, cooled again, a slow breath. The answer was not running. The answer was stepping back to the curb, standing on the safe side of the seam where kids and neighbors used to trade weather. The voice sounded farther after that, not angry, not disappointed, simply obeying a boundary that had been there all along. That night, in a different house with a different window, the same name rose softly from the dark outside and waited. The blinds stayed down. The rule spoke itself, steady as an oath. The driveway is not the sidewalk. The curb is where I stop. Some distances don't shorten with age. They hold, like lines painted on a road, instructing everyone who passes. And if a voice still tries the old game from time to time, it is only because the rules work so well that even the dead learn to follow them.